all of you and our distinguished professor, Professor R. Edward Freeman. Before I invite our Dean Academics, Professor Neeraj Amarnani, to welcome and set the context for this session, I take this opportunity to formally introduce Professor R. Edward Freeman. Professor Freeman is a thought leader in the fields of stakeholder management, business ethics, and executive leadership. He is a university professor and also professor of business administration and an academic director of the Institute for Business and Society at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business. And he has been associated with Copenhagen Business School in Denmark, Nyenrode Business School, Netherlands, Nottingham University, and Monash University. Prior to coming to the Darden School, Professor Freeman taught at the University of Minnesota and the Wharton School. Professor Freeman is best known for his award-winning book, Strategic Management, a Stakeholder Approach, originally published in 1984, in which he traced the origin of the stakeholders' idea to a number of others. It is a landmark book said to have helped to define and shape our understanding of how good management practice really is based on relationships with the stakeholders who both comprise and affect or are affected by the business. In addition to the several books and papers he has authored, Professor Freeman was an editor of the 15-volume Ruffin series in business ethics published by Oxford University Press. His latest book, The Power of End, offers a new narrative about the nature of business, revealing the focus on responsibility and ethics that unites today's most influential ideas and companies. Professor Freeman has a PhD in philosophy from Washington University and a BA in mathematics and philosophy from Duke University. Throughout his career, he has received a number of teaching awards from the Wharton School, the Carson School, the University of Virginia Darden School of Business, the State of Virginia, and the Academy of Management. He has received Lifetime Achievement Awards from the World Resource Institute and ESPN Institute, the Humboldt University Conference on Corporate Social Responsibility, the Academy of Management, and the Society for Business Ethics. He has worked with many executives and companies around the world, and his writings on stakeholder theory has been translated into many languages. In a webinar last year, I came to know about his keen interest and passion for theater and music. He is a co-founder and keyboardist in the house band of Red Goat Records. He is a songwriter too. He loves to cook and has been known to create masterful meals for his students. He has a keen interest in martial arts. On behalf of GIM, I'm really thankful to you, sir, for accepting our invitation. Thank you really so much. May I now request our Dean Academics, Professor Neeraj Amarnani, to present his welcome address and set the context for this session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Divya. So once again, Professor Freeman, a very warm welcome from all of us at Goa and the Goa Institute of Management. It's a real privilege to be able to participate in a session which has your presence in it. And what I would like to do is try and stay brief so that we could leave more time for your valuable inputs to our faculty group. The only small regret I have is this was, I guess, originally supposed to have been an in-person meeting where we would have had the much greater privilege of hosting and interacting with you in person. But as fate would have it, as things have panned out, I mean, panned out is such a bad word in the case of a pandemic, but please excuse the unfortunate pun. But I really feel it's a great privilege, and it's such a great time to talk about the type of work that you have been doing. You know, it's a great context in which we can actually host you. So that's a small silver lining we have for the occasion. I will just take a minute to share with you the program under which we are very gladly hosting you, and that's called the Distinguished Professors Program at the Goa Institute of Management. And under this program, we associate with distinguished scholars, academicians from around the world, especially in trying to explore possibilities of collaboration. Essentially, the main thrust of this interaction is to provide guidance and advice to the institute in terms of research and academic development. To also look at mentoring the entire faculty body with respect to directions of management thought that are emerging, to spend more time with individual academicians at the institute, especially of academic areas which are of direct interest to the visiting scholar. So if we have Professor Edward Freeman, who came from Princeton University in the healthcare management area, so there were faculty from the healthcare management area who spent a lot of time with him on one-to-one sessions as well. So we've had Professor Brad Blitz from the London School, London University, coming down, and we had a lot of good time with him. Divya has worked personally with him, for some research projects that they have undertaken, modern slavery and things like that. So we have had the opportunity of hosting luminaries in management and management thinkers on this platform, and it is along those lines that we have the privilege now of hosting you as well. Virtually this time, but as Divya said at the beginning of the session, we are really looking forward to this actually being an in-person hosting in the next time around. To my colleagues, you should really take advantage of the presence of Professor Freeman on these couple of sessions. He has done some amazing work in the area of ethics and strategic management, and is the paper he shared just now was really something I really liked reading, and I'd like to take a minute or two to set a context in terms of what we are doing at GIM, sir, with respect to the paper you were talking about on responsible capitalism, and taking that forward into a discussion on responsible research today with my faculty colleagues. So we were really actually, in fact, some of the narratives you have set out there resonate a lot with us and what we are doing at the Goa Institute of Management. We have just over the last year actually been on a journey, little over a year actually, have been on a journey of revisiting our mission statement. And in that case, one of the prominent words that comes up if we set up a word cloud of sentiments expressed from various stakeholders, especially faculty members, is the word responsible. Also, when we were having this discussion with the members of the board of governors of institute, there was a very strong sense that when we are talking about developing students and future leaders, the emphasis should not be on shareholder primacy, but should be on stakeholder primacy, and the need to balance stakeholder interests. So we were actually talking about stakeholder capitalism and stakeholder primacy, and I very happily get to read the paper you shared, which sort of only encourages us that somehow we have stumbled in the right direction, and we are probably heading forward with the right philosophy. We actually have dedicated centers. One is for the Center for Social Sensitivity and Action, which is actually headed by Professor Divya Singhal, which does human service in the area of corporate social responsibility, looking at that as a development track for students on campus, sensitizing them to how they could be more responsible leaders in the future. We have a Center of Excellence in Sustainable Development, which is trying to do its bit in terms of documenting best practices in environment management and business responsibly, doing environmentally sustainable business initiatives. We have a Center for Creativity, Innovation, and Design Thinking, which also resonates with one of the narratives you're talking about, the creative imagination that we need to bring to problem solving today, and which has infinite possibilities in front of us. So looking at all this, we feel that we probably resonate intrinsically to what you are writing about and what you have expressed. And I'm sure, hence, when you visit us, it would be a sort of a meeting of minds with respect to the faculty body at large, and with your gracious presence. So I would really look forward to that, and would hence want to use that as the background to today's discussion, and would really like to leave the virtual floor to you here onwards, sir. Right. Thank you so much again for taking time out, and please, Professor Freeman, the floor is yours. My colleagues would eagerly like to listen to you. Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Divya. I'm not sure I deserve uh, such an introduction, but my goal for today is not to screw it up so badly that you uninvite me to visit in person. So I'll try not to do that. I was really looking forward to meeting you. I know a little bit about what the school has been doing, and what I absolutely love to do now in my old age is to go around the world trying to help people figure out things like purpose and stakeholders and those kinds of things. So I really, and especially schools, and work with people on their research. So I really look forward to visiting, and hopefully next year will allow that. Um, I want to talk this morning about this new book called The Power of And Responsible Business Without Trade-Offs. The paper I sent was a public lecture I gave kind of on the ideas at Bentley College here in the US. And I want to start by saying I have an incredible, sense of optimism about both business and at least the younger generation of students. Now, my students are roughly 27 to 30. They've got 4 or 5 years of business experience, but they all are pretty much on board with a lot of the ideas that you've just talked about. Reminds me of many years ago, in a spirit of optimism and idealism, I got a PhD in philosophy. Now there are no jobs in philosophy in the U.S. Maybe India is different. Uh, my father, I grew up kind of poor on a very rural dirt farm. My father said, "Well, PhD in philosophy, you'll never have to worry about getting a job because they just opened a whole bunch of new philosophy factories out by the internet," and he had sort of no idea. Um, but that sense of idealism and optimism, even in times of a absolutely horrendous uh, global panic and pandemic, and for us, at least in the U.S., in an absolutely chaotic political environment, I want to remain optimistic because I think we're on the verge of really terrific change and improvements, and business has to be at the center of that. And hopefully, business schools can contribute. Let me start by saying, but look, there's a debate about the ethics of capitalism. There's a struggle ever since certainly the global financial crisis, um, where I think we saw fairly clearly that shareholder primacy doesn't work very well. There have been lots of calls for reform just based on the global financial crisis. Now, if you add to that increasing concern with global warming, if you add to that um, around the world issues of uh, inequality, uh, racial justice and injustice, and now you stir all that together and add a pandemic, you get what might be a sort of perfect storm. The We're not going to get out of this perfect storm by doing more of the wrong thing. We're not going to get out of this perfect storm with what I'm going to call the old story of business. Now, you know the old story. The old story said business is about the money. It's about profits. Business is about serving shareholders. They're the most important. It's best understood as free, unregulated markets subject to market forces. We need to understand people as kind of narrowly self-interested. And if you think about business ethics, well, that's a contradiction in terms. If you two words you put together, they're contrary, an oxymoron. If that old story is not going to help us solve some of the problems that we face. And I want to come with some good news today. There is a new story. This new story is emerging. It's not emerging just in my brain or others' brains. It's emerging all over the world. There are incredible number of movements or organizations, just a few of them. There are people resurrecting new ideas about corporate social responsibility. That's been around since the 60s, but there's a renewed interest in it today. There are people who are worried about shared value and what that is, philanthropy, sustainability. These are the ideas that sort of percolated a little through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And there are people, thousands of people, who see themselves as social entrepreneurs, as try to, yes, make money, but also to do something good for society. There's an organization called Just Capital, sponsored by Goldman Sachs and some wealthy investors on Wall Street, who rate every large corporation based on how well they're creating value for their stakeholders. There's inclusive capitalism, a group called Conscious Capitalism that I hang out with. People worried about green business, the GRI, the Sustainable Development Goals, impact investing, socially responsible investing, ESG investing, stakeholder capitalism, connected capitalism. You get the idea. There are a whole lot of these new ideas, etc. Several years ago, in the waning days of the Obama administration, I found myself at a meeting at the White House with a lot of the people that had started all of these things. And we were with the Department of Labor, and Tom Perez, who was the labor secretary under Obama, was asking the question, what do we need to do to really juice this forward, to really give it some more power? What's the brand that we really need here? And of course, most everybody there thought their idea was the right brand, not surprisingly. And I sort of took from that meeting, which was great because there were so many people, who saw the need for the new story. But I took from that meeting a different lesson, and that is, rather than argue about what the brand is it conscious capitalism? Is it inclusive capitalism? What's really the difference, etc. I took away, can we figure out the 4 or 5 critical ideas that whatever the brand is, this new story of capitalism is going to have to deal with? And then whatever the brand is what the brand is. I'd like to think of that as being way past my pay grade. And so we wrote with, I wrote with 2 colleagues, Bethan Parmar, is a brilliant young professor at Darden, and Kirsten Martin, another brilliant young professor at Notre Dame. We, both of whom had been PhD students of mine, we wrote the power of and. We found that there were at least 5. I mean, we talked about 5 key principles, the 5 key ideas, if you like, We think they're connected with each other, but these 5 ideas offer us a way forward. And I want to just briefly talk about each of them, and then we can turn to any questions that you might have. The first idea says, essentially, the old story makes a mistake about purpose. It's just a logic mistake, really. Um, I need red blood cells to live. It doesn't follow that making red blood cells is the purpose of my life. Even when I might have to worry about making red blood cells. Several years ago, I had both my hips replaced, and it was a very long surgery. You lose a lot of blood, and you actually have to worry about making red blood cells. And it still wasn't the purpose of my life. Um, I don't recommend that, by the way, if you're looking for recreation some weekend. I put having hips replaced very low on the list of fun things to do. Um, but nonetheless, it taught me a lesson. Look, purpose inspires us. Purpose is the reason we get out of bed this morning. Purpose is the reason I got up at 6 o'clock this morning, so I could be ready to talk to you. Most businesses are purpose driven. The idea that the purpose of a business is to make money. Look, it's the same logic. Business must have profits to succeed, to exist. I mean, this idea that profits are somehow bad, which certainly is there in American society. Again, I won't speak for India that I don't know very well, but many people think profits are bad because they think that's all that motivates business people. That's like saying making red blood cells is bad. Businesses must have profits to live, to exist. But it doesn't follow that making profits is the purpose of a business. Not without a lot more argument, most of which is specious. So, and now let's look at entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs, I'm sure there's some who do, but most entrepreneurs don't start a business just to make money. I tell students who want to be entrepreneurs, if they come to me and go, man, I'm going to start this business, I'm going to flip it, I'm going to get rich. I tell them you really should get a job because you're more likely to make money getting a job than you are starting the business. Um, unless you have a purpose that you deeply believe in. My son and I started Red Goat Records because we deeply believe in bringing back the music of Motown and Stax. We started Stakeholder Media because we deeply believe in taking stakeholder thinking to a much broader audience than just business school academics. We didn't start either of those to make as much money as we can, thank goodness, because we haven't. Um, I had a friend who started a restaurant in Copenhagen called Noma. Noma is typically rated as one of the best restaurants in the world, or was. And he said, Ed, we didn't start Noma to make as much money as we could because we didn't make any for the first 19 years. You look at entrepreneurs, they start businesses because they have a purpose, they have a vision. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs are on fire about personal computers. Elon Musk is on fire about space travel and clean energy and all kinds of stuff. The old story gets purpose wrong. And a lot of the new story gets it wrong as if profits don't matter. It's purpose and profits. And having that sense of purpose is important for all of us. Having a personal sense of purpose that gets us out of bed in the morning and inspires us. Making a living, taking care of our family can motivate us. We need to be inspired. Inspired is more than motivation in my book. Not surprisingly, the second idea is about stakeholders. This idea that it's only shareholders that matter is a bad idea. It might have been useful some time ago. It's the 50th anniversary of Milton Friedman's famous article. I was saying earlier, I just wrote a piece with my son Ben, which I think is going to be in the Economic Times of India on Saturday, about the emergence of the stakeholder idea. But it's really a simple idea. I have never understood why people thought that old book I wrote in the 80s was, any good. Because I thought this idea that business creates and sometimes destroys value for customers, suppliers, employees, communities, people with money was the most common sense idea I could possibly imagine. And so I didn't, be honest with you, I didn't even think that was an interesting idea in the book. The book now has something like 40,000 academic citations. There were only 2,000 copies of the book printed, just so you know. So I don't think it's well cited, not very well read. But what we see today is things like the Business Roundtable, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, the World Economic Forum. Everybody's embracing this stakeholder idea. Let's not forget about shareholders. It's stakeholders and shareholders. Shareholders are stakeholders themselves. I've never understood the contradiction here. Even if all you care about is shareholder value, how are you going to do it? You're going to have great products that customers want. You're going to have suppliers who want to make you better. You're going to have employees who show up with their minds. You're going to be good citizens in the community so they don't pass laws restricting you. If you do those things, you have a good idea and you get lucky, you might make money. So, stakeholders and shareholders. The third idea, there's more to be said about stakeholders, but I'll leave that. There's the third idea is important. It's the idea, we call it the sort of business embeddedness principle, and that is business is a social societal institution. It's not just a market institution. The old story says business, has to deal with market forces. Yes, it does. And it has to deal with societal forces. Some of those societal forces are about the natural environment. And some of those societal forces are about our education system, our government, our healthcare. We are at once citizens, consumers, parents, partners, etc. We connect these institutions in our hearts. It's time to get better at connecting them with our policies and our politics. The problem here, at least in the U.S., is a problem that many people have called crony capitalism, trying to use the other institutions to, in a sense, blunt market forces, trying to use the other institutions to make a special deal for yourself. Sometimes that happens in terms of corruption. Sometimes it happens in our special form of legalized corruption in terms of the way we fund elections and politics, etc. And this challenge of business as a societal institution is especially difficult when we think about the physical world. What we need is people using their creative imagination. I'll tell you just one quick story. Many years ago, I listened to the CEO of a major chemical company talk about being greener. They announced for some, lofty goal like zero pollution, etc. And then he goes around to all of the facilities all over the world making the speech, hey, we're serious about this. the engineers at one facility come up to him and say, sorry, Mr. CEO, we can't meet the interim goal. They had interim goals and stages, and it's a business-like thing. And it was going to take generations for this to happen. Really big company. And the engineers at this facility said, we can't meet the interim goals. It's just no way we can. This plant and equipment's too old. This process is just too dirty. So the CEO says, well, I'm serious about this. We're going to have to close the plant. So one way to say that is, you want me to make a trade-off? Employees on the one hand, environment, community on the other hand. Environment wins, employees lose. Engineers go away. They come back a few weeks later. They say, actually, a miracle has occurred. We figured out how to do it. And as the CEO told the story, he said, well, I asked, what's it going to cost? $10-20 million? It's a big plan. And they said, actually, we're embarrassed to say if we do it this new way, we're going to save money. Now, what's going on here? What's going on here is trade-offs are unacceptable. So what we do is we kick into gear the creative imagination. And it's this creative imagination that we need in putting together stakeholder relationships, especially when we think about being sustainable. It's easy to make trade-offs, and sometimes you have to make them, right? Sometimes you have to make trade-offs. But if all you look for is trade-offs, that's all you're going to find. Now, I know economists and people with economic training love trade-offs. But what I'm suggesting is there's a different way to think about this, to look for ways to dissolve what those trade-offs are. I don't have to pick between environment and employees. I can figure out a way to have both. And we need creative imagination. And we, as business school professors, need to figure out ways to teach creative imagination and to build it into the way we think about our courses. I hope I get a chance to talk about that a little more tomorrow. Well, the fourth principle is something called the fourth and is that we need to worry about our humanity and our economics. People are not one-dimensional, self-interested maximizers of their self-interest, of their short-term self-interest. There are a few people like that. We generally call them sociopaths, and we generally elect them to high office in politics. That's a nonpartisan statement from me. And anybody who's ever had a child or who's ever been in love knows that we're capable of far more than just looking after our own self-interest. This pandemic has shown this incredible acts of care and concern by people all over the world, sometimes putting themselves in harm's way. Think of all the medical providers on the front lines that have lost their lives, not because they're selfish, greedy little bastards, but because they think of others first. We can be self-interested, sure, and we can be other-regarding. And what research shows us is that human beings are complicated. We're both those things. The idea that business requires us to be self-interested all the time is again a mistake. I think we need a view of human beings as we can. One way to say it is I've got my iPhone here, and to think about what an iPhone is. Think about the problems we had to solve to be able to do an iPhone, or to be able to have this teleconference. Think about the vocabularies that we literally had to invent. We had to invent a vocabulary about metal, about glass, about the magical physics that happen on the inside, etc. That took many millennia to do. And then we had to be able to cooperate together to put those things into practice. What's a human being? The old story says a human being is a greedy little bastard out trying to do each other in. I say a human being is someone who can invent vocabularies to solve our problem and who can cooperate together to make those real. I think that's a more accurate view of what we are as human beings. Evolution has selected us for being good cooperators and for being smart enough to invent vocabularies to solve our problems. And finally, you know, um, we've got to have ethics and business. A lot of people go back to Adam Smith and talk about the father of capitalism. Turns out Adam Smith never used the word capitalism. And in addition to The Wealth of Nations, he wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. The theory of moral sentiments says, essentially, markets without ethics don't work very well. We certainly know that today. Business ethics, oftentimes I say I teach business ethics and people have to manage not to laugh, or they have to say I didn't know business had any, or it must be a short course or theoretical subject, and that's the problem. So this new story of business that's emerging is about purpose and profits, stakeholders and shareholders, business as a societal institution and a market institution, about our humanity as well as our economics, and it's about ethics and business. The result of these 5 ideas, I think, whatever the brand turns out to be, will be a sense of business and capitalism that's worth leaving our children. Because if we're not trying to make our institutions places for our children to live in, we have the bar too low. People ask me all the time, sort of, what's the bottom line here? And I tell them it's the Ben, Emma, and Molly rule. Those are names of my 3 kids. Can you go home at the end of the day? Can I say to Ben, Emma, and Molly, all of whom are grown now, but I still use the rule. Let me tell you what I did today. Let me tell you what I did today that I want you to learn from. Because we need to remake our institutions places for our children to live in. I think the problems that we face as a society are substantial. I think the pandemic offers us an opportunity to do things differently, to continue to think about, yes, making money is important, but trying to create value for all our stakeholders, trying to regain our humanity in business, trying to be a part of solutions to societal problems, and doing so with a sense of purpose and ethics is a pretty big challenge, and it's one I think businesses are in fact rising to meet. Let me stop there and see if anybody has questions or loud exclamations of, gee, that's the worst talk I've ever heard. Remember, I'm a rude American and I'm hard to insult, so I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, Professor, we have got, I think, 3 faculties. So, Professor
Okay.
Shivnath, you go ahead, please.
Good evening.
Yes, Professor.
Yeah. So, in your article, you mentioned that entrepreneurs like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs never started the company to make money, and they started because of the business idea. And so, you also talked about the word purpose, which is not just to make money, So my question is then what went wrong? Like, sir, if you see today, companies like Amazon, Facebook, Google, Netflix, Apple, Microsoft, all these companies are accused of avoiding tax, you know, taxes and shifting revenue and profit to tax haven and low tax countries. In fact, these companies or tech companies are also accused by antitrust bodies of abusing their dominant position or monopoly power. So my question is that they started with an idea. They didn't start with only to make profit out of it. So my question is then what went wrong?
Well, look, that's a hard question. First of all, one of the things I have learned is from a friend of mine at Amazon is not to believe everything that I read in the papers for that. The antitrust stuff is beyond me to try and figure out why that's there. No company is perfect. We typically think about companies, and business ethicists are the worst at this. We tend to think about companies in terms of what I would call saints and sinners logic. Most companies are sinners. Remember, they're only in it for the money. There are a few saints. So maybe Apple's a saint for a while, but the first time they do something stupid or they make a mistake, we put them over in the sinner category. Now, what's going on here is the old story has a real grip on us. We are literally in the grip of this story that business is just about the money. We oftentimes, if I say to you, gee, this business really has an ethics issue, I'd be willing to bet not a single person thought, wow, they must have invented something very cool that makes our lives better. But wait a minute, ethics is about good as well as bad. But we always look for it in business to denote the bad stuff, not the good stuff. Sometimes means and ends get perverted. I think the way we think about capital markets encourages that. The way we think about taxes encourages that. And we need to connect those narratives. We need to connect those narratives with, gee, what's really a good role for government with respect to business? Is it just being the referee and the police, or can we think about government as how it encourages value creation? And look, Oscar Wilde said it best many years ago. The famous playwright. He said, "Every saint's got a past, every sinner's got a future." I think we need to have a more balanced view of business and businesses. Every one of those companies that you mentioned has done a lot of good, and they've probably done some stuff that they wish they hadn't, or should have wished that they hadn't. They've all made mistakes and done wrong things, just like every person that I know. So in some cases, maybe they went very wrong. They kind of lost their sense of purpose. One of the good things about this new story being told in so many ways is that people are finding it okay to rediscover their purpose and to act on it and to declare they're going to act on it, even though they're not going to get it right all the time. I know that's not probably the answer you're looking for, but it's the best I got.
Yeah. So next we have Professor Akshay. So Akshay, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead with my question. Hi, Professor. What I just wanted to inquire was, we go back to the stakeholder theory. In fact, I've cited your work in my PhD thesis and not only yours, but the work of Professor Ronald Coase and also Williamson 1975, right? I happen to be a professor of strategy and ethics also at GIM. And my question just concerns around three fundamental facts. If I go back to Ronald Coase 1937, he talks about the incorporation of a hierarchy. If I go to his 1937 article, The Nature of the Firm, he says that firms come into existence because of market inefficiencies, which are largely due to bounded rationality and moral hazards, right? Which essentially views human beings, whether they be buyers or suppliers, which come at market equilibrium price, P star, or whatever it is, but as rational actors. If I dwell on that work, and also come back to later work of strategy scholars, my concern as an academic is that firms are largely viewed as rational economic players. So where does this go? I've read your work, so I'm leaving the biases aside of stakeholder theory, of ethics, of human beings, very complicated, but it's largely bounded rationality and moral hazards. So every individual or firm, as you rightly pointed out at the beginning of the lecture in the first 20 minutes, that they are trying to maximize profits or maximize the gains, whichever way we would like to look at it, right? So where does
Well,
the
no, I don't think that's. I didn't say that at all. I don't think they're trying to maximize profits.
okay, then I may have got you wrong, but where does the role of ethics come into this? Because
Yeah.
we're talking about bounded rationality, so
Well, look, Coase and Williamson are two of my heroes, and I've written some stuff on Williamson. Um, it, it, the the problem with the vocabulary of transaction cost economics is it's not very helpful. If I were to say to Bill Gates as he's starting Microsoft, look, what you need to do is to minimize transaction cost. I don't think he builds Microsoft, you know. Um, and it's not that there's anything wrong with those theories. In fact, in the first chapter of Stakeholder Theory, our book in 2010, we welcome Williamson to this large pantheon of stakeholder theorists. I had a number of conversations with Ollie over the years, and he finally came around to seeing, well, maybe there should be stakeholder advisory boards. Um, I think there's a technical out here in terms of governance, which again is in this first chapter of the 2010 book. But I don't think organizations are most usefully seen as trying to maximize profits. If you want to explain market forces, you might say, well, it's best if we look at organizations as rational as trying to maximize market forces. But nobody who's ever been in one thinks that's true. Um, Friedman and all were trying to explain why markets work. I'm trying to explain how good businesses get built, how great companies work. And there's a level at which, look, we're rational. We're rational economic beings, and not or, and we are deeply, profoundly moral and ethical in nature. Williamson would always say, and he says this in the Economic Institutions of Capitalism. He says, he decries the fact that he can't find a place for what he calls dignitarian values, like someone like the philosopher John Rawls. But of course, when you start with the idea that everybody might be out to get you, there's probably not much room for dignity in that. And so I've always looked at this as I'm a pragmatist, as a philosopher. How useful is this vocabulary? Useful for some purposes, um, not so useful for the purposes of how do we start a business and build it. Human beings are complicated. Yeah, we're boundedly rational, but we also are emotional creatures. We're spiritual creatures. We're sexual creatures. There's a lot more going on up here. There's a lot more going on here and in our hearts than just cozy and rationality. That's a very powerful idea, especially in economic theory. It's one that I have a lot of respect for. But I think it has limited usefulness in terms of thinking about strategy and management.
Yeah, so next we have Professor Devashish.
Yeah, thanks, Manas. Hi, Professor Freeman. I hope I am audible.
Yes,
you're right.
Thanks. Professor Freeman, thanks for such a lovely talk on a lovely evening here in Goa. I also enjoyed Prima Facie because I take a course which finally I've titled Making Profits While Doing Good. And largely I talk about the quadruple bottom line concepts, which effectively say that purpose is paramount to all the other three P's, which are profit, people, and planet. So, and also one of the most famous business leaders from India and one of the most respected ones also, Mr. Ratan Tata, he had written in HBR some time ago that if you only focus on purpose, then all the other things do follow, maybe in due course of time. But in my own experience, I've worked in a couple of startups trying to build them from the ground. And I believe that's also prevalent in the startup industry, which is that startups and young businesses do get enamored by the growth rate, what is the X growth rate per year on year, and what is the valuation of the business. So my precise question to you is, what would be your 2 cents to any startup guy to focus more on purpose early on in their careers? So essentially, is it a function of one's own journey that you start with some passion or some business idea? And the sad state of affairs is that you do need to focus on profits early on, but as you grow, you can then switch to thinking about purpose, or is it something else?
Well, again, I think Jeff Bezos is a really good idea of someone who's never really focused much on profits, who's focused on being the most customer-centric company in the galaxy. That's what's driven him, and the billions and billions of dollars he's made have come out of that. So I think what we got to get out of is this grip of the story that profits is all that matters. We need new ways to think about how we evaluate startups. One of the things that a lot of our students do is they have a business idea and they immediately start looking for money. They immediately start looking for venture capitalists or angels, et cetera. And I think that's a mistake. When you have money to do things, it makes it easy. When you don't have money to do things, you have to use your imagination. It makes it difficult. And we need more creative imagination and less focus on the VC. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is a road that many young entrepreneurs go down. And
Right.
it's a road that inevitably leads many times to failure.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of a young colleague of mine who had a paper that she wrote, which was actually turned into a fairly famous paper. But this paper, it was her passion, it was her life, it's what she spent the last few years doing. And she got so much advice and so much refereeing advice that by the time the paper came out in a very prestigious journal, she said, it's not mine anymore. And I always thought, gee, that's also sort of what happens to entrepreneurs. It's not my company anymore. It's not my idea. And so I think that's a problem. Ratan Tata is interesting. The Tata group is interesting. If you go back to the founding papers of the group back in the 19th century, I believe, what you will find is the stakeholder idea. They don't use the word, but it's there. This is how you run a successful business, etc. Now, I think they're a good example. They haven't always gotten it right. They've vacillated back and forth sometimes in their groups between being incredibly purpose and stakeholder driven and being driven just by the money. And I think that's more normal for most companies, but it doesn't invalidate the sense of purpose is important. It doesn't invalidate that the stakeholders are important. If you figure out how to get entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, focus off finding funding and towards finding ideas, my hat's off to you. There's a lot of money in the world chasing way too few really good ideas.
Right. All right. Thanks a lot.
Sir Anamika?
Good evening, Professor. I just wanted to ask you this question, adding on to what you just said. In fact, in behavioral sciences, we always talk about this, that an entrepreneur and a manager, the basic difference is that an entrepreneur chases a passion and a purpose, whereas a manager may chase balance sheet and the profitability. And because, like you said, that right now there is a lot of venture capital which is available in India, and there is a lot of debate that is going on around Indian startups, especially the tech startup, where we are saying that the venture capitalists again work on their own quotas or incentives, and therefore sometimes the purpose gets compromised. And in the SME or MSME literature in India, there are two parallel arguments which we see. One is the patriarchy or the Karta model of leadership, where we say that because the Karta or the patriarchal leader, the male leader of Indian firms, is responsible for the employees as part of their family, they take care of them. So they may not prioritize the larger social good, but at least that much which is under their decision is where they are very responsible and ethical. And then there is the other parallel debate which is going on, which is towards that till my own belly is full, how do I give and contribute to the society? So when I look at behavioral sciences and the literature in the behavior, there is a constant debate between the two. Like SMEs and MSMEs cannot be ethical and socially responsible because they don't have their own belly full. So at that point in time, if they have to cheat or steal a little, it's going to be okay. And the other part is also where it says that the Karta model or the VC funding model or the passion of the entrepreneur is enough to define the ethical space in which they can work. So where exactly is the trade-off at a global research level or global firms level? I don't know if my question is clear or not.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really great question. I would want to frame the problem differently. I wouldn't want to frame it as a trade-off here. I'd frame it as if I'm an entrepreneur, I have to figure out how to keep people's belly full so that they can, contribute and be a part of the business. I think if you frame it as I need to hire people, pay them as little as possible, that's a different way to frame it. I have a friend who started a retail store in the U.S. called the Container Store. It's about $1 billion now, and they've always paid. This is retail, which usually has, at best minimum wage here in the U.S. And they've always paid people twice the industry average because they believe that that's the way you get great people. You don't want them to leave, so you pay them. And this means you got to be incredibly creative about what products you offer, how you source them, all those things. You see, stakeholder interest, uh, you can't think about them as a trade-off. If I pay my employees less, I might make more profits. You have to think about them as being harmonized. And I like the musical metaphor of harmony, not balance, because balance assumes there's a trade-off here. If I harmonize stakeholder interests, they're different. The notes are different, but they sound good together. And that's the idea here, is to try and get them kind of working in the same direction. That's easy to say and very hard to do. And it's also very hard to do when I'm in the grip of a story about, well, I just make trade-offs. It's all about the money, and I just make trade-offs. So I think you pointed out one of the ways that trade-off thinking causes us to frame a problem in terms of trade-offs that I would say puts us in an impossible situation here.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so next we have Professor Umesh. Yes, Professor Umesh, please go ahead with your question.
Good evening, sir. This is Umesh, Professor Umesh here. My question to you is, there is definitely a large awareness on terms of these trade-offs between profits and your impact on society and the environment. But if you look at the government, they are still looking at the trade-off in terms of development versus impact on the environment, especially in the developing countries. And this becomes a sort of a excuse for corporates to say that if the government itself is not considering, environment, why should we? And then definitely in these countries you have this issue, and how do you sort of counter that?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I think you're absolutely right. I spend a fair amount of my time over the years in Indonesia. Indonesia is interesting because, it's 17,000 islands. And if the people in global warming are right, it's not going to exist because they're all going to be underwater. And I think that's had an effect on the government and its policies, which again are not perfect. So I don't know. We're all engaging in a lot of denial, but we're all. Many are engaging in denial about global warming. We even call it something like climate change. I don't use the phrase climate change. Climate change is the weather. Oh, it's raining outside. That's the climate change. Global warming means it's getting hotter, and it's getting so hot. It might get so hot in a fairly short period of time that things are not, in many places of the world, many places, India, will not be habitable by human beings in the way that we know it. It will take incredible commitment to creative imagination, to business inventing things like clean power and other things. The answer is not to do that because it raises the cost. Again, there's not a trade-off between, or we shouldn't just look for trade-offs between green and profits. We shouldn't look for trade-offs between, as you put it, development and environment. Embrace the idea that we need development that makes the environment cleaner.
Right.
Are you saying to me that, I know you're not, but are people saying to me, look, I want a car, and remember, I'm an American, so we all have multiple cars. I want a car that's an SUV, a big car. So I live in the woods, and there are a lot of animals around that can be hit. But I want it to make the air cleaner, not dirtier. I want you to figure out how to make a car so it actually makes the air cleaner, not dirtier. Are you telling me somebody can't figure that out? I don't think so. I think they can. We live in a world not of scarcity. We live in a world of abundance when you think about what the creative imagination can do. Who would have thought 100 years ago that we can have this meeting?
True.
The power of creative imagination is almost infinite when we kick it in. We only are going to kick it in when those trade-offs become unacceptable. When we're in the grip of that trade-off thinking, whether we're government administrators or managers in a big business or entrepreneurs, we're not going to look. We're not going to look for it. I really think that thinking about business, I'd much rather have a curriculum. This is going to sound outrageous. That takes as the most important course in the business curriculum improvisational music than economics and finance. And I'm not trying to argue before people reply. I'm not trying to argue economics and finance is not important. It is extremely important, right? But so is training a creative imagination.
Right. Thank you.
Well, it wasn't a very good answer, but best I have.
Yeah.
Do we have any more question? Because I have one from my side. I think I'll go ahead with that till we have more faculty joining me. So Professor Freeman, so I teach corporate finance subject. And in this subject, I usually start with the objective of firm, which is to maximize shareholders' wealth, right? And of course, students comes with this perception that profit maximization should be the, the objective. But of course, because shareholder wealth maximization is a very comprehensive goal, so it tries to, incorporate everything that, the corporate they do. And in fact, in your lecture also, you mentioned that, shareholder as a stakeholder. I mean, no company can maximize shareholder wealth if they are, not looking at, let's say, their product or their customers or their other stakeholders. So my question is, so if I start with, let's say, objective of firm being shareholder, wealth maximization only, so where am I going wrong? That is one. And second is, where is the separation of, let's say, stakeholder, theory and shareholders wealth maximization? So where does this separation exist, and why this separation exists?
Well, the separation exists in large part because finance theorists have ignored stakeholder theory for a very long time. I would say you go wrong in the very beginning by saying the goal of a firm is maximize shareholder wealth. In a world of uncertainty and complexity, in a world of people that are complicated, you may as well say the goal of the firm is to sell its products on Mars. Because if shareholder wealth includes everything, it's not clear that that's possible for us to know. Now, there's a part of stakeholder theory that says, to maximize shareholder wealth, or let's use Michael Jensen's version, to maximize the total, the total. How does he put it? Maybe he puts it as total wealth here. To maximize that, you have to pay attention to stakeholders. That's called instrumental stakeholder theory. Still, the goal is maximize shareholder wealth, if you like, but in order to do that, you look at, you don't look at stock price. You look at all the, what Jensen would say, all the financial claims, etc., on the firm. Now, we also just did a film called Fishing with Dynamite that looks at shareholder primacy versus the stakeholder view. In that film, Jensen says, look, people make mistakes. Bill and I did. He thought the idea of kind of maximizing for shareholders was mistaken. or at least that's what he would say now. And what he would say is, you can't think about that without thinking about integrity. So Jensen's come around to saying, look, we have to put ethics together with this stuff. There are other finance theorists like Luigi Zingales at Chicago who have made similar kinds of claims. I don't have any problem with instrumental stakeholder theory. I just think it's not very useful. You know, after the global financial crisis, a lot of finance theorists said, well, we didn't mean maximize short-term shareholder wealth. We meant maximize long-term shareholder wealth. Now, my response to that is, look, I'm not a finance theorist. Finance has always seemed like a pretty special case to me. But you know, I did utility theory way back in the day, and I never understood why the fact that some people might have convex utility for money was interesting. But a lot of people do, and I respect that. But you know, I said, look, I'm not a positivist, but a lot of you folks are. And, you know, long-term shareholder value is not observable. The only thing observable is short-term shareholder value. The only thing, what you observe is share price, right? And that's a short-term measure. People have argued, well, you know, this made sense in the long term. In the short term, it doesn't. And so the short term moves, but the long term moves too. And so this stakeholder stuff makes sense in the long term. Well, when is it going to be the long term? And the answer is, of course, it's never the long term, because we live in the short term. Life occurs in the short term. So the short term, long term distinction is itself, in my view, a dodge, you know, that says we don't really think this works. So, you know, I'm not sure what you do with that. My sense is, you know, maybe Luigi will figure this out. Jensen's off doing this stuff on integrity now, so I don't know. In this film we did, Zingales is in it, and Jensen is in it, and at some point, look, it doesn't matter if you say I'm going to do everything for stakeholders because I believe in shareholder value. Fine, that's okay. I just think you'll create more shareholder value if you have an objective that's broader than that.
Okay.
And so shareholder value, I would say, turns out to be a result. And so if I think about it like that, it's a lot like, surely you know people who are absolutely obsessed with being happy, right? Everything they do got to lead to happiness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Aristotle knew this. You know, they're the most miserable people in the world. Why? Because happiness is an outcome. It's an outcome of the people you love. It's an outcome of what you do, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's better to think about profits as an outcome. Think about shareholder value as an outcome of how I manage the other stakeholder relationships. Right? And so I don't think saying this maximize the outcome is helpful in terms of thinking about how to manage the other relationships. So that's my response. I don't expect to change anyone's mind with that.
Sure. So we have so we'll take two more questions. We are still,
Okay.
So Professor Neeraj.
Professor Freeman, this is it's a question in all excitement from my end. So 26 years back, when I stepped into a B school classroom for the first time, the first textbook I picked up was Management by Stoner, Freeman, and Gilbert.
Oh, yeah. Jeez, I still get a royalty check from that.
And 21 years before today, when I first stepped into the classroom on the other side of the desk, the first textbook I picked up to teach was also Management by Stoner, Freeman, and Gilbert. So, you know, how would you think, sir, as a management thinker and writer over all these years, the one biggest paradigm change which you'd had to bring into the theory of management, if we were to reread your textbook in today's context, the one biggest changed theme, because some principles are sort of pretty perennial in nature, but there would still be something that I'm sure you could tell us as to what is your biggest feel of change.
That's a really scary question to me. I haven't looked at that book for a very, very long time. One of the things we tried to do I think Jim Stoner did the first 2 or 3 editions. I joined on edition 4 or edition 3. I don't remember which one it was. And Dan joined on the 6th. One of the things we tried to do was we added ethics to every chapter. And we added art to every chapter. Every chapter starts with a fairly significant picture or work of art that had something to do with the chapter, and every chapter has something to do with ethics in it. And I think every chapter has something to do with strategy in it. So I would see the integration of thinking in management as one of the most critical things. Part of what happened in management was, in an attempt to be more, quote, scientific, what happened is we divided up into specialties. And when strategy, which was the last integrative view, moved to sort of being essentially Michael Porter-like industrial economist, the thinking, how do I put this together as a business, evaporated. People taught courses in organization behavior and strategy and finance and accounting and marketing, etc. And no one thought about this idea of business as a whole. And I don't think that's been very successful. We need to bring that back. The places where we can bring it back are entrepreneurship. I still hold out some hope we can bring it back in strategy. I hold out some hope that we think about the business as a whole in ethics. But I would say the integration of the disciplines of business is one of the most important challenges that face us.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, so we'll have.
And I'm not going to go back and look at this book. I don't think I can stand that.
Yeah, Professor Ajit.
Yeah, Professor Freeman, I have a slightly cheeky question to ask.
Yeah, sure.
I checked up the Just Capital rankings of companies, and I realized that across most sectors, the companies that get ranked highest for doing good, I mean, they do good on issues that matter. I find most of the companies are also leaders in their respective, sectors. So whether it is Microsoft, Apple, Intel, Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo. So the question is it that companies who do well then also start doing things that matter? Or is it that companies who do things that matter are the ones who do well?
Well, again, that's an old question. Can you afford to do well because you're profitable? Or are you profitable? Can you afford to do well? I think that question is absolutely in the middle of the grip of the old story. My response to that story is, to that question is, I don't care. What I care about is that people see these things as going together. I think you have to look deeper in terms of why these companies are leaders and what made them into leaders. Ultimately, what we would find, I think, is some of both sides of that question. There's some things you can do which you couldn't do if you weren't enormously profitable. And there's some things you can do where it doesn't matter at all. What matters is you have the support of people in terms of the vision and purpose of the business. So at least that's the way I would answer that question. You have, people who want to show it one way or the other. Finance people want to show that profits are matter first. Ethics people want to show that no, doing good matters first. I'm a pragmatist. I don't really care. I care that what I do care about is that we see those things as going together for whatever reason. Sometimes it might be for one or another reason. I guess the thing that I object to, though, in the question, and not object to your asking it at all. The thing I object to is oftentimes we want to find the one and only one way to run a business for all businesses, for all times, for all situations, and we want to know the answer. Is it this or that? I think that's a fool's errand. Business is one of the most diverse institutions ever. There are lots of ways to run a good business. Right? Sometimes you can run a good business by only caring about profits and doing good follows. Sometimes you run a good business by putting purpose first. And so I'd like to see a kind of more diverse view, if you like, of what it is, rather than, I think as academics, oftentimes we want to find the one and only one way to do things with our models and theories. Thanks. That's a great question.
Thank you. I really like to answer. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Freeman, we have almost exceeded our time, but still, I would still ask you if you have to give one message or one piece of advice to management teachers, to us. So, can you quickly please answer the question?
Yeah. You have to be who you are. You have to be authentic. You have to teach from your heart. That might sound, I don't know, might sound sort of fuzzy or whatever, but you know what's in your heart, and the students are going to remember you when you're authentic. When you're not trying to, you got to teach them some, it has to be certain content, all sorts of stuff. I'm not arguing against that. I'm just arguing the more you can be present for the students, absolutely in the moment for them. Pay attention to where they are, not where you are, and teach from your heart. I think the more effective it will turn out to be.
Sure. So thanks a lot, Professor Freeman, for an illuminating and informative session that we have got today. We really appreciate the clarity with which you have, taught us many aspects related to, the objective of a firm. It kind of inspired me, especially with the idea that, the positive idea that, we can have a business that can make this world also a better place. So on that note, please join me thanking Professor Freeman. Thank you to all of you, all the participants, for actively participating, in the session. And thank you, and have a great evening ahead. Thanks a lot again, Professor.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.